Oh, hi everyone. How are you? Getting closer to the new year, so happy new year to you all. I can't believe that, this week goes by so fast. The week between Christmas and, New Year's is just flies by. And, you got to go and get all of the Christmas candy. I mean, this year, because, things are so tight, from inflation and stuff, um, it seems like there's more candy in the clearance aisle than ever. But, because there's such tightwads too. Like Target only has 30% off of the candy, but still, it's like that hits good when you got some Christmas money to spend and be like, whoa, it's Halloween all over again. Okay? You got it? So, we're going to do part 19. And we're going to begin with discovery page 597. Regular page is 530 out of 1,960. And I just want to try and do a little quickie here, maybe an hour, hour and a half, just to kind of tie up where we ended last night. I didn't want to stop where I was at, but I felt like, it was just kind of too overwhelming, too much information packed in to just continue where I was at. I mean, my mind was blown, It's like just so many things. So many things that people had questions. Why didn't they go to the original source first? Then I blame myself and I'm like, why did I believe what other people were saying? Instead of knowing that, what? Go to the source and read it for yourself. I learned a hard lesson and I need to apologize for anything that I misspoke of when I thought that other people knew what the hell they were talking about, because I didn't. So here I am, and here you are, and we are going together in a quest for the truth and the facts. As such, I'm going to start on 530. I'm looking here at 529 where I left off. I'm going to start in this bottom paragraph on the page 17. I think it's this 34-page document. And we've got the Hamburglar speaking still. And she's asking Christopher, questions. And they're kind of playing a mental battle here of, did you do it? Did you not do it? If you did it, how did you do it? You know what I mean? She's trying to get him to slip up. He's trying to get her to believe he's not lying. And we see blatant lies here that he is saying that he would have been much better off just telling the truth on, because it was going to come out anyway that he was, having an affair, or that they were separated and that he had moved on, maybe she hadn't, etc., however it plays out. He's minimizing a lot of things, and he's lying about a lot of things, and that did not help things on his side at all, because then it colored him as a liar entirely. And we don't know how much of what is here is lies. We really don't, until we see it and have proof and can source and cite what we see. So here we are, and the Hamburglar says, next, I asked Chris if he could pass a question on the polygraph related to if he physically caused Shanann's disappearance. Chris replied, yes. I asked Chris to tell me what the question meant to him and what he believed I was asking. Chris stated, I feel like you're asking me, did I have anything to do with it myself? Or did I help somebody do it? And I had no part in any of that. Now, a side note to that blew me away. Those words falling out of my mouth hit my brain, and the way that he stated this admits he knows something is wrong, and he knows that something happened, whatever it was. It's like I say, when I said this, I was like, uh-oh, there he did it. He should have shut up and had a lawyer, because like I say, I'm going to read again what Christopher said, and this blew me away, because he says, I feel like you're asking me, did I have anything to do with it myself, or did I help somebody do it? And I had no part in any of that. What does that say? That says he knows. That's very, very damning. A prosecutor really could have went a long way with that if this whole thing wasn't pulled out based on her being inappropriate with him with the massages. Like I say, reverse the roles. See a man doing that to a woman who was accused of being a family annihilator, you know, in the way that she was treating him in general. It was inappropriate. And then it goes, I then asked Chris to tell me all the ways someone could physically make someone disappear. And Chris replied, I mean, like, if you're, like, talking about, like, what I've seen, like, on the movies, or, like, how people, if you read about other people. Sorry, let me turn my ringer off for a moment. There we go. Sorry about that. Chris replied, I mean, like, if you're, like, talking about, like, what I've seen, like, on the movies, or, like, how, like, people, if you read about other people, and this is how we know he contracted the, like, herpes from NK. I mean, you hire someone, like a hitman. I'm just being honest. I asked Chris to think about all of the possible scenarios in his head, and he said he could hire someone, or a person would use someone they knew to, in parentheses, do it. At that point, Chris giggled and told me it was a hard question to answer because he had nothing to do with the disappearance. Chris said he didn't like to think about it. Okay. I explained to Chris that a person could physically cause another person's disappearance by murdering them. And Chris agreed with my statement. I asked Chris to list all of the physical ways a person could cause someone's disappearance through murder. Chris stated, stab someone, shoot someone, hit them with a blunt object, what else is there? I mean, use a weapon of like a gun or a knife. Chris appeared to be thinking, so I said, you could smother someone. Chris repeated what I said, and I immediately said, you could strangle someone. Chris said, you could hang some. Yeah, you can. All those things. I mean, it's hard to even think of that kind of stuff right now. I continued telling Chris a person could drown, shock, or burn someone to death. I asked Chris if he could think of any other ways to murder someone, and he said, lure them into a trap, I guess. I asked Chris to explain, and he said you could have someone waiting around the corner, and an accident could happen, such as getting hit by a car. I told Chris that a person could kidnap another person. He agreed and said someone could take a person somewhere and torture them and leave them without food or water. And Chris then stated that a person could poison another person or beat them to death as a way to make them disappear. I asked Chris if he would have an issue with that question on the test, and he said he could definitely pass that question. I explained to Chris that I wanted to make sure that I only wanted to know if he physically caused Shanann's disappearance. I told Chris sometimes people can feel guilty for causing someone to leave, such as telling a spouse you want to be separated. Chris said, that's why I feel like a jackass right now. I reiterated to Chris that the test was only to ask if he physically caused her disappearance by murder, kidnapping, etc. Not just caused her to leave because she was upset over their conversation Monday morning in bed. I explained to Chris that I was only going to ask him about Shanann on the test. I told Chris that it wasn't hard to assume that Shanann and the girls were most likely somewhere together. Chris asked, that's gonna loop the kids with it though, right? I explained to Chris the polygraph tests I was going to administer was only going to ask him questions about Shanann. Next, I told Chris I was going to ask him on the polygraph test if he was lying about the last time he saw Shanann. And Chris replied no. I asked Chris to describe the last time he saw Shanann, and he said the last time he saw her, she was in bed after he talked to her. Chris said Shanann was lying in bed and had just told him she was going to take the girls to a friend's house and she would be back later. Chris said Shanann was lying on her right side and she had mascara running down her face. Chris explained Shanann didn't take her makeup off before she went to bed that morning. Chris said the last time he saw his children was on the baby monitor as it was cycling back and forth. I told Chris I had to talk about the worst case scenario and told him if he murdered Shanann, that image he described would not have been the last time he saw her. Chris said, I know. I agree with that. I told Chris if he murdered Shanann in the house, she was obviously removed at some point, so her lying in the bed would not have been the last time he saw her. Chris said he agreed. Lastly, I told Chris I wanted to ask him on the polygraph if he knows where Shanann is now. And Chris replied by saying, I do not. I told Chris he was cooperating with the missing person investigation, and the question centered around him actually knowing the location of Shanann, but not telling the police. I told Chris that Shanann could have called him and told him her whereabouts, or if he actually murdered her, he would know the location where he or someone else dumped Shanann's body. I told Chris that if the last time he saw Shanann she was in bed crying, he would be able to pass the test because we all knew Shanann was no longer in bed. Okay, so that's a recap of where we ended yesterday. It was just so powerfully packed there that I wanted to, really spend some time on that in the beginning here. Sorry it's repetitive, but I think it's so important. So, I asked Chris what his answers would be to all 3 of the posed questions. And he responded, I had nothing to do with what's going on right now. I did not physically harm her. Last time I saw her was in bed laying on her side with some mascara on her face after we had a conversation, and I do not know where she is right now. I asked Chris who he believed would have hurt Shanann and the girls, and he said he exhausted every option. Chris said he thought it was possible a stranger who had Shanann and the kids, and they're not safe right now, that they've been physically hurt. I asked Chris to tell me what he thought should happen to the person if indeed Hold on. Sorry. Okay. I asked Chris to tell me. Sorry. Okay. I asked Chris to tell me what he thought should happen to the person if indeed his wife and children were murdered. Chris said, that's the worst possible thing. So the worst possible thing should happen to the person who may or may not have murdered Shanann and the girls. It's kind of choppy right there, but here we go. Okay. Chris said, the worst possible thing. I asked Chris to explain, and he said, it's either going to be like life in prison or the death penalty, isn't it? That's the only 2 things you really can do. I asked Chris if he had any more information he hadn't shared with the detectives, and he said no. Chris said he exhausted every option of reaching out to friends and family members who may have seen or heard from Shanann. During the entirety of the pre-test interview, Chris denied any involvement in his wife and daughter's disappearance, as well as any infidelity. The polygraph questions were next. A polygraph examination was administered using a recognized directed lie comparison technique, the Utah 3-question test. The examination utilized a Lafayette computerized instrument, which is in parentheses, hashtag 381983, model LX5000, which continuously monitors and records respiration, electrodermal activity, and cardiovascular functioning. In addition, a motion sensor pad designed to record peripheral behavior activity and cooperation during the exam was utilized. The instrument passed internal self-calibration prior to the exam. I conducted a known acquaintance test to assess Chris's suitability for testing and to establish baseline physiology. Chris was able to follow instructions and showed suitable responses. The following relevant questions were defined and reviewed in detail and asked of Chris over 3 chart repetitions. Question number 1 in bold was, did you physically cause Shanann's disappearance? His answer was no. The next question is, are you lying about the last time you saw Shanann? His answer was no. Do you know where Shanann is right now? His answer is no. I assessed Chris's psychophysiological responses to the above relevant questions. It is my professional opinion Chris was not being truthful during the testing. Global analysis of the physiological data revealed it was of sufficient interpretal quality to complete a standardized numerical analysis of the test's results. Boy, that's like saying, Sally sold seashells down by the beach. Whoa, those are some packed sentences. Okay. Analysis of the polygraph tests using the empirical scoring system resulted in statistically significant numerical scores that support a conclusion of, in parentheses, deception indicated, in parentheses, DI, when Chris was answering the above listed questions. In the post-test interview, while I was out of the room scoring the polygraph charts, Chris remained in the interview room and watched videos on his cell phone of his girls giggling and playing. Essay Coder and I returned to the room to speak with Chris about his deception. We also had a printed photograph of Bella and Celeste we placed on the table in front of Chris. I informed Chris it was clear he was not being honest during the testing and he did not pass the polygraph test. Chris replied by saying, okay. I told Chris we now needed to talk about what actually happened. And Chris stated, I didn't lie to you on that polygraph. I promise. Essay Coder told Chris it was time and asked him to stop and take a deep breath. And that's kind of, when he's saying he promises and everything, and there's so much in there that we know that he's lying about. We know that he's lying about NK. And it's just... Speaking from what the Hamburglar said, I told Chris that I appreciated him coming in to take the polygraph, even though he knew he wasn't going to pass the test. I told Chris he stayed because he knew he needed to get everything off his chest. I asked Chris if he could start again and tell us everything that happened. Chris said everything he said was true. I told Chris the most important thing was to find out what happened to Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. And Chris said, okay. I told Chris that holding the lie inside of him would do nothing for him, and he responded, I know this, I'm not, trying to, cover things up. Chris said he wants his wife and children to come back home. I told Chris he knew his wife and children were not coming back home. Chris continued to say he hoped his wife and children would come back home. And in parentheses, he says, and I don't know, they're not coming back home. S.A. Coder explained to Chris that we were confused and we had received a lot of leads over the past day. Chris continued to say he didn't know where his wife and children were located. Chris said, if I could have my babies back home right now, I would. I want them back. I want everybody back. That's the God's honest truth. S.A. Coder told Chris he couldn't understand why there were two Chris's. Chris then said, I cheated on her. I'm not proud of it. She accused me of it. I denied it. And I feel horrible for it. Like, she was pregnant. I didn't hurt her. I cheated on her. I hurt her emotionally. Chris admitted also that he did not attend the Rockies game. Chris said he went to dinner with her the night of the Rockies game. Chris said the 5 weeks he spent alone, he spent it with her. Chris explained he fell out of love with Shanann because he fell in love with her. S.A. Coder asked Chris what her name was. Chris said he didn't want to get her involved in what was going on and didn't want to ruin her life. Chris said she was a wonderful person who knew that he was married and that he was having issues in his marriage. Chris said he told her he was going to get separated from Shanann, but he didn't know what that was going to look like. Chris said she took his breath away, and he never thought in a million years something like that could happen. Chris said he never felt the same way about anyone in his lifetime as he did about her. S.A. Coder told Chris that he didn't think his girlfriend hurt anyone. And Chris asked if they could leave her out of it and get back to talking about his wife and daughters. Hold on, I need to turn off the light. It's a little bit easier to read it in the dark. Chris agreed. Where he said, Chris asked if they could leave her out of it and get back to talking about his wife and daughters. Let me see here. Oh, okay, I get it. Okay. So S.A. Coder, the one who was like, that one, okay. So he said he told Chris that he didn't think his girlfriend hurt anyone and asked Chris if they could leave her out of it and get back to talking about his wife and daughters. Okay, I get it. Chris agreed. S.A. Coder asked Chris where his wife and children were located, and he said he didn't know. Chris said the affair was the only thing he was holding back, and S.A. Coder reminded Chris that he was not questioned about infidelity on the polygraph. S.A. Coder then informed Chris we already knew about his girlfriend, Nikki, later identified as Nicole Nikki Kessinger, age 30, 7/3/1988. That makes me feel so old. Let's see. She would be 34 now. She was only 30 then? And a mature 30 because she had her geology degree. Geology. That'd be so fun to be a geologist. I don't know if it's hard to find jobs contracting as a geologist. I have to say, never in my life have I ever met a geologist. I think archaeologists are cool too. So anyway, S.A. Coder told Chris we were very concerned about his wife and daughters, and Chris said he was also concerned. S.A. Coder told Chris that it shouldn't have been the happiest. It should have been... What? S.A. Coder told Chris that it shouldn't have been the happiest time in their marriage. Doesn't make any sense. It says shouldn't have. Okay. S.A. Coder said he believed Shanann may have been a controlling person who didn't listen to him and could do whatever she wanted. S.A. Coder said he wanted to give Chris an opportunity to help us find Shanann and the kids. Chris said he would do whatever he could to help us, in parentheses, police, find his wife and children. Chris said he didn't know where his wife and kids were located. S.A. Coder reminded him that his father flew across the country and was waiting in the lobby. And S.A. Coder told Chris that he was lying to his father and everyone he talked to. S.A. Coder pleaded with Chris to help us find his babies. Chris said he wanted to find them. S.A. Coder asked Chris if we could go back and talk about, in parentheses, that night. Chris agreed, and S.A. Coder told Chris the police had his Alexa, which he explained was trained to record distress. And the police also had the contents of his, Kessinger's, and Shanann's text messages. S.A. Coder asked Chris to tell us again about that evening. Chris reiterated that he woke up at 4 o'clock a.m. and woke up Shanann at 4:15 a.m. to talk about the house and separation. S.A. Coder asked Chris if they talked about Kessinger, and Chris said Shanann accused him of having someone else. Chris said he denied having an affair. Chris said Shanann asked him why he had a 68... Okay, this is weird too, because there's words in here that shouldn't be. Let me try it. Let me try to muddle through. Chris said Shanann asked him why he had a $68 at dinner the other night and asked him if there were two of them at dinner. Chris admitted the charge came from his dinner with Kessinger. Chris said he couldn't bring himself to admit the affair because he and Shanann were already crying very hard. Chris said he told Shanann he just wanted to separate. S.A. Coder asked Chris about selling the house, and Chris said Shanann initiated selling of their home the week prior because both of them knew they couldn't afford to live on their own. Chris said Shanann contacted their realtor named Ann, unknown last name, on Monday, August 13th, 2018. Chris, sent Ann a text message asking what she could do. Okay, hold on. It says Shanann initiated selling the home the week prior because both of them knew they couldn't afford it. Chris said Shanann contacted their realtor, Ann, unknown last name. Okay. On Monday, August 13, 2018, Chris, sent Ann a text message asking what she could do. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. She called the week before, he called on Monday. Okay. S.A. Coder then asked Chris to tell him about the pregnancy. Chris said Shanann was about 80-20 when they talked about the pros and cons of having a third child. Chris said after Shanann got pregnant, she told everyone it was his idea. Chris said he wanted to have a son. Chris said Shanann told her friends she was pregnant. Hold on. Chris said Shanann told her friends after she was pregnant she was 70-30 against the pregnancy. Chris said he was confused why Shanann would say such a thing. S.A. Coder asked Chris if he understood that some of what he was saying didn't make sense. Yeah, I freaking agree right here. I'm trying to read this and it doesn't make sense. Chris said, I know. And S.A. Coder said he didn't understand how a woman and 2 kids could vanish off the face of the earth. Chris said, I promise you, I have nothing on my hands. I did nothing to those kids or her to make them vanish. Chris told us it was on video that he left and was in his truck. Chris said, I didn't load anything into my truck besides my tools, my container, my book bag, my water jug, my lunchbox. And S.A. Coder asked Chris what happened next, and Chris said he drove out of the driveway. S.A. Coder asked Chris what happened with his wife and kids before he drove out of the driveway. Chris said, I didn't do anything with them. They were still in the house. And S.A. Coder asked Chris where his wife and kids went, and Chris said he didn't know. S.A. Coder told Chris that his wife was not the type of person to vanish, and Chris agreed. S.A. Coder told Chris that his wife had plans that day and during the week and did not leave because she wanted to. Chris said, "Okay." I sip my Gatorade, I do. Chris said he didn't do anything to Shanann or the girls. I asked Chris if it was an accident, and he replied, I didn't do anything. I again asked Chris if it was an accident, and he said there was not an accident, and if there was, he wasn't in the house when it occurred. Chris said he did not cause an accident and did not do anything to his wife and kids. S.A. Coder asked Chris if it was a misunderstanding, and Chris said the only misunderstanding was that he didn't tell Shanann about the affair. Chris said he couldn't bring himself to tell Shanann about the affair. S.A. Coder asked Chris how the separation was going to work, and Chris said he planned on getting his own place. Chris said he anticipated having 50-50 split with the kids. Chris said he planned to take it slow with Kessinger to see if anything developed. I told Chris I found it hard to believe he and Shanann had an emotional conversation with Shanann where they were both crying, and he had yet to shed one tear in the 2 days we interviewed him. Chris said he loved his girls, and it didn't mean anything that he hadn't shed any tears. In parentheses, at that point, Chris appeared to force a snuffle. Chris said him not crying did not mean he didn't love his kids or wife. And I told Chris it didn't make any sense, and he said, I'm hoping they're still around I'm hoping they're somewhere alive. I told Chris he no longer had to take his girls to take care of, and the loss of them should cause him pain. Chris said he did feel pain. I told Chris I wanted to see the guy who felt bad about what he did and wanted to get it off his chest so the police could find his little girls. And so his girls were not out in the middle of a field somewhere. Chris said, I love those girls to death. Chris said he was showing us the Chris who cared about his girls and his wife. Chris said his lack of tears didn't mean he lacked love for them. I told Chris it was weird and didn't make any sense. Chris said he understood and could see my point. I told Chris that I understood how some people could be pushed to do something they regret. Chris said I know. S.A. Coder told Chris we could keep talking to him once we found the girls. S.A. Coder told Chris we could continue to talk to him no matter what he told us. I asked Chris if Shanann did something to the girls, and he said, no, I don't know. I have no clue. I asked Chris, did Shanann do something to them? And then you feel like you had to do something to Shanann? Chris sighed and said, no. They were at the house when I left. They were there. I told Chris that the only way Shanann and the girls could have left was in his truck. Chris said there's no way, because, I didn't just throw them in my truck. I reminded Chris his truck had GPS installed. I asked Chris if he knew the GPS would ping every 10 seconds, and he said yes. I told Chris we were going to find out exactly where he went. Chris said, I know. An essay coder asked Chris if we weren't asking him the right questions, and Chris said, "You're asking all the right questions." Or he said, "You're asking all the questions." Essay coder asked Chris what we were doing wrong, and he said we weren't doing anything wrong. Essay coder asked Chris if Shanann did something, and he said, "I don't think she did anything to those kids. We both love them with all their hearts. There's no way." I told Chris it could have been an accident because I knew something happened inside his house. I asked Chris if something happened to his baby girls, then he felt like he needed to take something into his own hands and deal with it. Essay coder asked if he had to clean something up for Shanann. I told Chris I knew he loved his girls with all of his heart, but sometimes people make mistakes. Essay coder asked Chris what he was thinking about, and he replied, "She couldn't have." I asked Chris which one of his girls had breathing problems. Chris explained both of his girls had inhalers, but Cece had the endoscopy and surgeries. I asked Chris if he thought Cece had trouble breathing, and Shanann freaked out and decided she didn't want to live without her baby girl. Chris said he didn't think so. Next, I asked Chris about a cold case homicide from Aurora, where a male beat a family to death with a ball-peen hammer. I told Chris the only survivor of the attack was a 3-year-old girl. I told Chris the girl grew up with no family, and she admitted she wished she had died with her family. I gotta comment on this. If it's a cold case, how did they know it was a male? Was the 3-year-old who survived able to tell them that it was a male? Interesting. I don't know what a ball-peen hammer is. I'll have to look it up. I told Chris I have seen parents panic and decide their children can't live without each other. I told Chris I've also worked on a case where a mother smothered her 2 children because she didn't want her husband to take her children away from her. I told Chris that the mother felt like she was doing right by her children and was saving them from future pain. Chris looked at me and asked, "Why? How is she saving them pain?" I told Chris the mom didn't want them to have to live a life without her. S.A. Calder told Chris it was a weight that was going to be on him forever unless we could resolve it. I told Chris we were giving him a lifetime, and he needed a lifeline. I told Chris we were giving him a lifeline, and he needed to reach out and take it. S.A. Coder then pointed to the photograph of Bella and Celeste. And asked if the girls looked like the photograph. Chris pointed to Celeste and explained she wore the same dress on August 8th or 9th because he recalled having to unbutton 2 buttons on the back of the dress in order to get her pajamas on that evening. S.A. Coder asked Chris if he made sure the girls were warm when they left the house, and Chris seemed confused and said his girls were always warm, and their beds were always warm. S.A. Coder asked Chris if they were taking care of the girls at the very end. And he said the girls were always taken care of and never missed a meal. I told Chris he took the girls out of the house with their blankets and animals because he cared. Chris said, I mean, I'm always caring for these kids. There's nothing in this world. They're my life. I told Chris I believed either he or Shanann made a mistake. I told Chris I was getting concerned that maybe he did something to all three of them. Chris said, I did not do anything to these kids. I asked Chris what Shanann did to the girls, and he immediately asked if he could talk to his dad. S.A. Coder asked Chris if he would please tell his dad what happened. Chris said he'd been in there for 5 or 6 hours and asked if he could just talk to his dad. S.A. Coder recommended Chris's dad come into the interview room instead, since there was a lot of activity in the lobby area of the police department. S.A. Coder asked Chris what he would tell his dad, and Chris said he would tell his dad he loved him and wanted him to be by his side. S.A. Coder told Chris that it seemed he wanted to get everything off his chest and asked him if he would explain further what happened between Shanann and the girls. Chris said he talked to Shanann about the separation, the house, and Shanann asked about the affair. Chris said Shanann had mascara running down her face and was very emotional. S.A. Coder asked Chris if he promised to talk to his dad and tell him everything. Chris agreed. S.A. Coder asked Chris if it would be easier for him to tell his dad and his dad could tell us. Chris said, I don't know. And S.A. Coder said he believed Chris was the type of guy who needed to take responsibility. S.A. Coder said he was worried his dad would distract him, and Chris asked if S.A. Coder meant it would distract him from talking to us. Chris said he just needed to talk to his dad. Just a second. At that point, S.A. Coder and I met with Chris's father, Ronnie Watts, in the lobby. Ronnie was wearing a polo shirt that had Papa Ronnie embroidered on the chest. We explained to Ronnie that Chris wanted to talk to him about what happened. We also informed Ronnie that everything that was said in the interview would be audio and video recorded. Ronnie said it was fine and told us he understood. And Ronnie was escorted to the interview room, and we told Ronnie and Chris they could have as much time as they needed. Chris pointed to the digital recorder on the table and asked if we were going to leave it in the room, and we said yes. The door was shut for privacy, but still had the key in the lock. Ronnie asked Chris if he was going to tell him what was going on. Chris told Ronnie he failed the polygraph. Chris said they're not going to let me go. Ronnie asked if there was a reason why the police wouldn't let him go. Chris said that the police knew he had an affair. Ronnie asked Chris if he was going to tell him what happened. Chris said that when he and Shanann had a conversation that morning, it was emotional as they spoke about the separation. Chris said he went downstairs and then told his dad, I don't want to protect her. I don't want to protect her. I don't know what else to say. Ronnie asked him what happened, and Chris replied, she hurt them. Chris said, and then I freaked out and hurt her. Just a second, folks. I gotta check, make sure everything's on. garbage cans out. Make the squirrel bring the garbage cans out. When, when he comes in at 4 a.m. Uh-huh. So what you can do. And don't fall, it's icy. I know. Tell her about that. Have to make sure that, the Hubbers is up and everything to go and get the one from work and all that good stuff. Make sure that everybody knows what they're doing. Here we are in this pivotal moment, and I had to get up. I do apologize. So, this is the bacon where we got through all of the fat. These are the pages that are pivotal. I'm going to write that down too. 535. Okay. So now this is where we have seen this interview. And Christopher has his head down. He's covering his face, but it sounds like he's sobbing. And Papa Ronnie, has his head down too. And he's mumbling. And this is almost to the moment where Tamburglar dashes in. I mean, like swoops like a dragon on. And, I mean, I just wish that they would have had an attorney. I just don't know why this happened like this. What did I say when I was looking at it? What, the 11-hour freaking interrogation? He had, how many hours in when he took the polygraph, etc., etc. So then he's got Papa Ronnie there. Now, note that Papa Ronnie did not say, "What? You were having an affair, son? What?" Note that he knew that. Note that that was not a surprise. So Papa Ronnie knew about the affair. So obviously when he was back in North Carolina, he had mentioned to Papa Ronnie that, he was, pollinating others. So anyway, Ronnie asked him what happened, and Chris replied, "She hurt them," Chris said. And then I freaked out and hurt her. Okay, so this is the first admission, confession, if you will. And Ronnie asked Chris if Shanann and the girls left after that, and Chris didn't answer. Ronnie asked if Shanann started hurting the kids, and Chris said they were. Ronnie told him to talk to him and tell him what happened. Chris whispered, She smothered them. They were smothered." And Ronnie immediately asked, "They what?" Chris answered, "She strangled them." Ronnie asked, "She smothered them or choked them?" Chris replied by saying, I didn't hear anything. When I was downstairs, I came back up and they were gone." No, me talking to her about that was like talking to her about separation and everything, about I don't know, what else to say. Because I freaked out and I did the same thing to fucking her. Those were my kids. Ronnie asked Chris if Shanann freaked out over the separation as he was leaving for work. Chris said Shanann laid back down and he went back downstairs, but he heard a little commotion upstairs and didn't think much of it. Chris said he went back upstairs and saw Shanann on top of Cece. Ronnie asked Chris if Shanann was choking Cece and if Shanann killed Cece. Chris said they were both. Ronnie asked, "Both of them?" And Chris said, "Yes." Ronnie asked if Shanann choked both of them to death, and he said, "I freaked out and did the same thing to fucking her." And Ronnie said, oh my God. But he mumbles, he's like, oh my God. Chris said he didn't call the police about what happened. Ronnie asked, so then what did you do, haul the bodies off or something? And Chris said he didn't know what else to do and freaked out. Ronnie reiterated that Shanann choked both Bella and Cece to death, and he, Chris, lost it and choked Shanann. Ronnie clarified with Chris if he choked Shanann and Chris. That's just, it's rage. And Chris told his dad he was sorry, and Ronnie told him he knew he was sorry. Chris said he knew Shanann knew in her heart about the affair, but she was waiting for him to admit it. Chris said she believed Shanann just lost it because she knew he was cheating, and he denied it. Ronnie asked Chris if that was the point Shanann went off. Chris said it was when Shanann started crying. Chris asked his dad what was going to happen, and Ronnie asked if Shanann was upset over the separation or the affair. Chris said he believed Shanann thought he was having an affair. Chris said he kept denying the affair to Shanann. Chris said he talked to Shanann prior about separating, but Shanann hoped they'd go to counseling. Chris said he didn't want to go to counseling. Chris told his dad it'd be the last time he would see the light of day, and Ronnie questioned why Shanann would have hurt them babies. Ronnie continued to apologize to Chris and told him he would love him no matter what. Ronnie asked Chris if S.A. Coder knew about what happened, and Chris said he wanted to tell him, Ronnie first. Ronnie said, well, we need to find a good lawyer and see what the hell they can do. Okay. This is a pivotal moment, and this is documented. Okay. Pivotal moment here. Okay. Page 536. In 1960, it is documented that a lawyer was mentioned. Now, Papa Ronnie said it. A good lawyer would be able to say that is when the word lawyer was mentioned, and anything after that is inadmissible. Now, what was said before, they would have to work with, perhaps. I am not a good lawyer. I am a law school dropout. Okay? So, this, in any of the televised interviews, is not as clear as it is here because they didn't want us to see that the whole entire word lawyer was out. We saw when Papa Ronnie was out of the room and he's like, well, shouldn't we just, like, what are those called? Those people who work with people, like, what do they call them? A lawyer or someone? What do we need one of those? How do we find one of those? I think I need to get a phone book to go and find one of them. What do they call it? Like a lawyer or attorney? All of that. Okay, we see that. What we don't see is what is written right here on page 536 for a lawyer. Okay? Now, a good lawyer would have an argument with another competent attorney, and they would say, Christopher didn't ask for one, his father did. Okay? And didn't tell the law enforcement officials, CBI officials, they wanted one. This was in their conversation. So the two would have to fight it out, and a judge would have to decide which side to go with. A judge is most likely going to err on the side of caution and throw out this because basically the judge would fear this trial, which could have been a death penalty case, getting overturned. So a judge is going to fear that most of anything because somebody's life is on the line. A judge with two lawyers battling this out would have probably thrown that out and figured that, you know what, if there's enough here that this man is going to lose his life over, we need to hear it and we can't depend on something that is a regrettable admission to this court. Now, as I have said in my other video, the moment that Christopher Watts wants to tell the whole story, this can go to trial. The rumors that are out there that Christopher Watts missed his deadline for a 35C are just that. They're rumors and they're scare tactics. There's a lot of people who want him to stay in jail. A lot of people who want him to stay under the jail. Okay? So, they convinced the family that there was some deadline. They didn't read the full letter of the law, and especially for Colorado, and not just in Colorado, but especially in Colorado. It has a 35C where when there is more information, evidence in a death penalty, death-worthy, murder, I can't think right now, first-degree murder trial, there is no time limit. This case is more than eligible for a 35C the second that Christopher Watts decides he wants to talk. No one can talk for him. He may not want to talk. He's conditioned to being treated like a piece of shit behind bars, so he doesn't notice anything different. I get frustrated with the misinformation that is out there. As you all know, that's my quest of trying to right the wrongs. And if I have misspoken, I need to correct those to my audience as well. It's my learning curve. I started this channel in June. I thought that the people who I was listening to had reviewed and were speaking from a point of subject matter expertise, as they were an attorney and had written papers on the subject. I was mistaken in my assumption, and I learned that I need to not depend on others to tell the truth. I knew that for a while. I just forgot. COVID brain, So I'm working through it, and I'm trying to right my wrongs. And thank you for being in the journey with me to continue to find the truth. And with that being said, we're going to proceed, because at this point, we saw when Tamburglar swooped in. But I like that this is in this discovery copy, and I don't know if I have one of the originals. I don't know. I know that people say that they hadn't heard certain things that I've said, and I know that there are things that I have not seen yet in this. So maybe they're in there later. I don't fully know. I'm not looking ahead, going through this journey with you all together. But it is stated in here as record in the discovery, where Papa Ronnie said to Christopher Watts, well, we need to find a good lawyer and see what the hell they can do. And that is gold. So now, it says at that point, S.A. Coder and I re-entered the interview room, and Ronnie said, come on in. Now, we know that S.A. Coder was like, and Tamburglar was whoosh, speed of light in there. You know damn well they had recorders underneath that table. You know they did, and they can't admit to all that they heard, because they couldn't have been recording him without him knowing, but you know that they did. You know that they did. You know that they were listening, because, well, yeah, they were listening, obviously, but you know that they know more about what was said than they're going to admit. They would have just needed to put a cell phone or a little hand recorder underneath there, underneath the table. So then it says, I asked Chris if he was doing okay, and Ronnie said, no, he's not. I sat down next to Chris and asked Chris to help us work through everything with him. I asked Chris to tell us what he told his dad. Chris said after he and Shanann had their conversation Monday morning, Shanann accused him of the affair and he denied it. Chris said Shanann knew in her heart that he was having an affair. Chris said Shanann also knew about the dinner from Saturday night and that it was too expensive for just him. Chris said he went downstairs, started packing up some things, and heard a couple things upstairs. Chris said he didn't think anything about the noise. Chris said he continued packing and went upstairs to talk to Shanann before he left for work. Chris said he saw in the baby monitor that Bella's covers were pulled off and she was just lying in bed. Chris said he figured Bella was just hot. Chris said the baby monitor cycled over to Cece's room and she, Shanann, was in there with her, on top of her. Chris said he freaked out and ran into Cece's room and got on top of Shanann. Okay, so this is really laid out here. And this is new to me where he said that they had the argument and he was downstairs packing up some things. I thought it was just that he came upstairs like during the argument. I didn't realize that, they had the argument by this story. I didn't realize that he said that, they had the argument and he went to go and was packing up his things and then he heard and saw on the monitors. I did not realize these steps were there and laid out like this. And I don't know if it's because some of the interviews that you see, they take out some stuff just to make sure that the little clips you hear are very, very salacious and keep you interested to not change the channel. And then Chris said Cece was blue and those were my babies, those were my kids. I remember seeing that. I asked Chris what happened and he said I did the same thing to her, Shanann. Chris said he was in Cece's room when he did the same thing to Shanann. Chris then described that he put Shanann back in their bed. Chris said he didn't know what to do and was shaking. Chris said, both my kids were blue and they were gone. Any normal fucking person would have called 911 at this point, but He said, and then just like that, blind, I'm not that person. Like, she hurt my kids. Fuck, I had to do the same thing to her. I asked Chris what happened after Shanann was in bed, and he said he pulled the sheets back over Shanann and covered her up. Because I couldn't see. I couldn't look at her. I felt horrible for what I did. Then I look at my kids and see what she did. I asked Chris where Shanann and the girls were located now and told him we needed to find his babies. S.A. Coder told Chris we could help him get his girls out of the cold. And Chris said, they're gone. There's no bringing them back. I asked Chris where they were. They were located at the first location he went to at work that day, which was Survey 319. I asked Chris where they were located at Survey 319, and he said right there off the site. I asked Chris how he picked the location, and he said it was like the first site he was supposed to go to that morning. I'll write something down here. Something because I have a thought I want to bring up about this later. Okay. So, he says right there off the site, I asked Chris how he picked the location. He said it was the first site he was supposed to go to that morning. I asked Chris where we'd find the girls at that site, and he said, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to fucking do. Like none of this made sense. Why would she hurt my fucking girls? I asked Chris if his girls were in something or under the ground. Chris didn't answer. I asked him if he would like us to take him out there. Chris said there was no way he wanted to go out there. Chris said he would go if we wanted him to, but he didn't want to go. S.A. Coder asked Chris if he could point to where the girls were located and then we could get them out of the cold. Chris said he was sorry and started to cry. Chris asked us not to think anything less of him. S.A. Coder asked Chris if all three girls were out at Survey 319, and he said yes. I asked Chris what Shanann was doing to Cece, and he said she was on top of her with her hands around Cece's neck. Okay. I'm going to write that down. Okay, so S.A. Coder asked Chris if he actually saw it. Oh my god. Okay, I'm really having a brainstorm here. Hold on. Oh my god. Alright. Got something in the CAG. Something in the CAG of my brain and I just can't get it out. I'm going to have to talk about it in a different recording because I don't want to go too far off track, but this is just making me really think of a couple of things that we've already read through and how it measures up against that. Are your guys' minds doing that as well? So then when it says, okay, say Coder asked Chris if he actually saw it, and Chris confirmed he saw it on the baby monitor. Chris said that's when he ran into Cece's bedroom and threw Shanann off of Cece. Chris said he saw that Cece was already blue and not moving. Chris said he went into a blind rage and did the same thing to Shanann. I asked Chris if he ever went into Bella's bedroom, and he said after he put Shanann back into their bed, he saw Bella on the baby monitor and he just knew by the way she was sprawled out. I asked Chris if that's when he packed the girls' special stuff, blankets and stuffed animals, and Chris nodded yes. I asked Chris how he got the girls out to Survey 319, and he explained he took them in his work truck. Chris said he put Shanann and the girls right behind his driver's seat. I asked Chris what he was thinking, and he said he was thinking that his babies were gone, and then he put his hands around his wife's neck and did the same thing. Okay, well, why didn't he drive to a hospital? If he couldn't have the presence of mind to, if this was true, why wouldn't he have even just pedal to the metal, call 911 on the way, say what happened, and try to get them to the nearest ER to try to resuscitate him? Say that, he couldn't have waited for an ambulance. I don't know. Okay. I asked Chris if Shanann fought back, and he said not much, because he had a lot of rage. I asked him how he knew Shanann was dead, and he said he knew because she wasn't moving. At that point, Ronnie asked us to look at Shanann's Facebook page. Ronnie explained 2 days ago. Shanann posted a photograph of a 5-foot-tall baby doll that was lying on the couch. Shit, sorry. Ronnie said the doll was completely covered with a sheet. Ronnie said, I'm thinking this might have been planned. I don't know, Ronnie said. The caption read, what do you say to this? Now, I saw that picture too, and it freaks me the out. I mean, those baby dolls that, I got one in 1980, where, they're like the dolls that are as tall as you when you're 3 or 4, 5. And he says, this 5-foot tall baby doll. And I remember, and it was this weird sheet, this weird white blanket pulled up over the baby doll's head, from her knees to her toes. The bottom part of the baby doll's legs were out. It looked like something you would see in a morgue. And you're going, my God, were the kids watching NCIS or something? What the? So yeah, Shanann thought that'd be a wonderful caption to take a picture of and say, what do you say to this? It's weird. I've never seen anything like that, and I don't think that's normal kid behavior, because kids know not to have anything on a baby's face because it's just instinctual. But we saw it on multiple Facebook pictures and videos of Shanann laughing that the girls slept with covers on their heads. And she had adult sized pillows in there for them, and then would laugh that, the pillow would be on their head, the blankets were on their head, etc., etc. Now, I know somebody's out there going, it's because they had girls. Okay, so if you were advised by your physician to put a pillow in so that your baby sleeps at a 30-degree angle because of the GERD, it is instructed that you put the pillow under the sheet. So, yes, there is this ridge for you to lay baby down, and baby can be at that 30-degree angle with no risk of getting under the blanket whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. And, you're not supposed to have any loose bedding, nothing. I mean, they want you to have nothing now. My first baby, was 34. We had the whole crib set, the crib bumpers and everything. And by the time I had my 4th, 5th, and 6th, it was advised not to do the bumpers, when baby could start to move a little bit. You're supposed to take them out. And now it's like, you have to just get the plain white mesh ones, if that. And then you're like, why do we ever even really have bumper pads for? I mean, babies really thrash around? No. But I mean, because of what you teach your children, always tucking the covers when you do tuck them in the toddler bed or whatever, you always have their mouth open and stuff. Babies and children play like that. So when they're putting blankets on their babies, I have never seen a child put a blanket on another doll's face, Barbie's face, stuffed animal's face. In fact, I've seen them, pull it down around their mouth. I've never seen what I saw in this picture on Shanann's Facebook. And I think it shocked out of a lot of people. Now, what's interesting is that it says, at that point, Ronnie asked us to look at Shanann's Facebook page. Ronnie explained 2 days ago Shanann posted a photograph of a 5-foot-tall baby doll that was lying on the couch. Now, I thought that in Nutgate, she had blocked them from her Facebook. And he had taken down his Facebook, so it wasn't like, it could go there. So who did she have on the Facebook that would have shown Papa Ronnie and Cindy this? Was it Jamie? Did somebody say this is weird? Because I didn't think they were supposed to be seeing her Facebook page. But anyway. When she cut them out of her life, did she also let them not be in her downline? Or did she still expect them to try and, or not to try, to do their monthly minimum for her to maintain her position with her, 200 person downline. Christopher Watts was one naive man, and he still is. He still is so naive. So, without further ado, here I go. Ronnie said the doll was completely covered with a sheet. Ronnie said, I'm thinking this might have been planned. I don't know. Ronnie said, the caption read, what do you say to this? Ronnie said the sheet covered the doll's head and the only thing sticking out was the doll's feet. Ronnie said Shanann commented that Bella had put the sheet on the doll. Ronnie said a kid wouldn't do such a thing. An essay coder asked Chris if he recalled the incident, and Chris said Shanann made fun of it and thought it was funny. I asked Chris if Bella did it, and he said he didn't know because he couldn't recall. Ronnie said he was around Bella, and Bella would only cover her baby dolls up to their stomach. Ronnie never saw Bella cover a doll's head like it was a body. I tend to believe Papa Ronnie. It's instinctual not to do that, Essay coder, and I said, and see, this is another word that's in here that shouldn't, because it's messes it up. Because it says here, Chris then looked at essay coder, and okay, there we go. Nope. It's the no callers that are messing me up. Ugh. So, Chris and I looked at SA Coder and I, there, insert a comment whether they like it or not, and said he was sorry for lying to us. SA Coder told Chris he was a good man, and Chris immediately responded, I'm not a good man. And SA Coder told Chris he stayed to talk even though he knew it was going to be difficult. Chris said, I stayed here for 6 hours and 11 minutes so far. Well, 6 hours and 11 minutes that far. So where is that timing that's documented? Did they put when they cuffed him and everything? I'll have to look into that. Chris said, I've been here for 6 hours and 11 minutes so far. Chris was reading the counter on the digital audio recorder. Ronnie said he could understand how rage could come out by seeing your kids dead. And Chris told his dad he didn't understand what it felt like to see his daughters blue in the face. I told Chris his dad was going to love him no matter what. Chris looked at his dad and asked how he could still love someone who killed his wife. And Chris said nothing will ever be the same again. SA Coder asked Chris if Shanann was on top of Cece when he got into the room, and Chris said yes. Ronnie asked Chris if Shanann's hands were around Cece's throat, and Chris said he didn't know what to do. SA Coder asked Chris if he was trying to save Cece, and he said she was already blue in the face. She wasn't moving. Her head just laying over limp like that. I told Chris it was very important to know where he put the girls at the oil well site, and he said, I just didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what else to do. I was so scared. It's like my wife just did this, and what to do? Anything I would do from there was just going to be like just a fucking insensitive and horrible. And SA Coder told Chris he was in a tough spot. I asked Chris if he would show us where his girls were located, and he said, what's going to happen? SA Coder told Chris we were going to help his girls get out of there. And SA Coder asked Chris if he preferred one of his co-workers to go out there, and he said, oh my God, no. And Chris said SA Coder told him everyone thinks of him as a good man, but they will say, what the fuck did you do, Chris? Why didn't you just tell the cops to begin with? Chris said he couldn't have his coworkers show us out to the oil well site because they were just going to go from their own opinions about him once they figure everything out. SA Coder told Chris the girls were still his babies, and I told him I didn't want someone else to find them out there. Chris agreed to show us where they were located at the site. I told Chris that SA Coder and I needed to step out of the room to get some things arranged, and Ronnie agreed to stay in the room with Chris. While SA Coder and I were out of the room, Ronnie told Chris he was sorry. Chris said, I didn't know what the fuck to do. This is just fucking horrible. Chris said, the problem is I don't even know the police believe me or not. And Ronnie said, I know you'd never do anything to hurt no children. Never. That was your life right there, those little girls. Chris told Ronnie that his mother always said Shanann was an unstable person, but he never believed in a million years that could happen. Ronnie said he was asked if he thought Shanann could do anything to hurt Bella and Cece, and Ronnie told them, no? Herself? Maybe. Ronnie said he didn't have a clue Shanann could do such a thing, and Chris asked his dad, why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to those two little girls? And Ronnie told Chris he was sorry. Now, here we go. Ronnie told Chris he would get him a lawyer and they would see what they could do. Here we go. Second mention of an attorney. Okay. Second mention of an attorney is on page 538. Where is said attorney? Why didn't an attorney appear? You know that there were probably attorneys who were on this from the beginning and were telling him to not do anything, and he was just not listening. Because so here we have this in an official document. Here is the second big thing about them getting a lawyer. As we know, he was not represented. For the sham deal that he got. As you hear, because I have the other documents and whatnot, and as Ronnie and Cindy have went on to explain, they didn't have his best interest at heart. Yes, they were going by the thing saying that all the families agreed this was best and blah blah blah. It isn't true, and I'll be able to speak to that later with the documents. But it's not as if he had anybody there for his best interest whatsoever. Ronnie told Chris he would get him a lawyer and see what they could do. Ronnie asked Chris if Shanann killed both girls while they were sleeping, and Chris said, yep. Chris said, I emotionally drove her to do something stupid. Ronnie told Chris that it was not his fault and not to blame himself for it. Chris said, it's all I can do right now. And Ronnie said they'd probably call it a crime of passion. And Chris replied, I don't know, like, just because I hit it, I hit it, that's the thing. And that's the thing that's going to break the camel's back right there. I didn't just call the police right after it happened. Chris asked Ronnie if he told his mom yet. And Ronnie said no. Chris told Ronnie that Shanann had a temper. And 1 minute she'd be okay and the next minute she would not be okay. Ronnie asked Chris what Shanann said that morning when he told her everything. Chris said Shanann asked him why he wanted to give up. Chris said Shanann told him, fuck you and fuck you and fuck you. And that is in quotations. Alrighty, and then Ronnie continued to question Chris about why Shanann would take any of it out on the girls. Chris said he ruined everyone's life, which included his family and his friends. Chris then asked his dad if he, Chris, could call his foreman and tell him he was going to go out to the oil well site. Ronnie asked if they could just describe where Shanann and the girls were, and Chris said no. Ronnie asked Chris if they were buried in something, and Chris said, Shanann is. Ronnie asked about those babies, and Chris said, That's what I feel horrible about. They're in a freaking oil tank. I didn't know what else to do. Chris said, please, God, forgive me for everything. Ronnie said, babies, babies, babies. Chris replied by saying, they're gone. Chris said Shanann took it out on the girls because of him. Chris told his dad that he, Ronnie, didn't know how unstable Shanann was. Ronnie said Chris's mother also believed that Shanann was unstable, a narcissist, and bipolar. I think Cindy's right on point. I really do. I think Cindy knew that, and Cindy said that, and that may have been something that Shanann was aware of by previous psychological intervention and assessment, and that's why she wanted her. Sometimes when people realize that somebody is not gonna buy your bullshit, you make up reasons to not want them around you, and you treat them like the enemy, and you get other persons to side with you if you are a freaking narcissist, and that's what she did. S.A. Coder and I returned to the room a short time later, and Ronnie advised he needed to step out to use the bathroom and to text his daughter. Ronnie asked S.A. Coder about finding a lawyer who wasn't a public defender, and S.A. Coder and Ronnie agreed they would discuss it later. There you go. What is that, 4th time asking for a lawyer, and these people are still proceeding? All of this could have gotten thrown out if there was a freaking lawyer involved. I think that's the 4th time. That's the 4th time. That's the 4th time. 4th freaking time. I walked Ronnie to the lobby and returned to the room. We returned with a colored photograph, approximately 8.5 by 11 inches, which was taken from a drone earlier the same day. The drone had flown over Serving 319, and the image showed a tank battery and a field surrounding the site. which included the image of what I was informed was a sheet near the bottom of the photograph. I asked Chris what the photograph was, and he confirmed it was of Survey 319. I asked him to tell me the location of Shanann and the girls. Chris asked how old the image was. And I told him it was taken that day. Chris looked at the photograph and pointed to the patch of dirt in the field below where the tank batteries were located. Chris advised Shanann was buried at that location. Chris then pointed to both oil tanks and advised Bella and Celeste were in the tanks. I gave Chris a pen and asked him to mark where everyone was located. Chris put an S where Shanann was located and a B and a C on each oil tank to indicate where Bella and Celeste were located in separate tanks. I had Chris sign the bottom of the photograph, and I labeled it with the date and time. Sure you did, hamburger. Anything said past this point where they first asked for an attorney. At this point, they had asked for an attorney no less than 4 times, documented. None of this should be in here. S.A. Coder asked Chris if the girls were inside the tanks, and he said yes. S.A. Coder asked Chris if someone who didn't know what they were doing could open the tanks, and Chris nodded yes. I asked Chris what was in the tanks, and he said it was a mixture of oil and water. I asked Chris about the sheet located in the field, and he said the sheet was what Shanann had been wrapped in. I asked Chris what the girls were wrapped in, and he said they were just in their pajamas. I asked Chris if they were wrapped in their blankets, and he shook his head no. I asked where the girls' blankets and stuffed animals went, and he advised they probably blew away in the wind. Chris said the blankets and stuffed animals were left by the sheet which was near Shanann's grave. Chris explained he dug Shanann's grave using a shovel from the back of his work truck. Chris said he always had a shovel with him at work. All right. And that sentence, at this time, I am going to cut this video just because it is so packed with information. It's emotionally very upsetting. I'm sorry that we have to, wade through this to get to the truth. But it's part of it. It really is. But I'm so sad at this point. I'm sad and shocked and confused. Confused. So we got through pages 530 to 539. And this is, I want to see, Discovery, page 605. So only 9 pages, 7 pages of Discovery, but it's just so packed. It really is. And this, we went an hour and a half. An hour and a half here. I mean, sometimes it's just kind of like that's what needs to happen. It's just kind of, cut it there. Thank you so much for listening. I will definitely be finishing this up in the next couple of days. This part of it anyway. We're still pecking away. Thank you so much, and keep the comments coming. We're going to get to them all when we do the live. So that we'll have a big old marathon live. Thank you so much, and if I, for some reason, don't talk to you before then, Happy New Year, all my friends, and thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe, and tell your like-minded friends. I'm loving that we're making a difference, exposing the truth. Thank you so much for your kindness and for your time. Thank you.